Welcome into Rounding the Bases.
Round the bases. Everybody knows Joe Goldberg. It's around the bases. Everybody knows Joe Goldberg.
What's up, everybody? Welcome into another episode of Rounding the Bases, presented by Community America Credit Union, invested in you. I've got a special episode today. I'll tell you why in just a moment. First, a shout out to my friends at Chief of Staff Kansas City. Doesn't matter whether you're in Kansas City, the Midwest, or like my guest on the East Coast in New York, or anywhere for that matter. Chief of Staff, I love partnering with them. For me, it's great because they're right down the street from where I'm at. But if you are looking for a great resource in terms of job market, in terms of looking for employment, in terms of making a change, in terms of finding someone, they're an incredible resource. As I said, they get culture, they get people. That's why I love them so much. So check them out, chiefofstaffkc.com, making connections that matter. And today's connection is a good one. But first, I said a special episode. I think all my episodes are special because I love all the guests that we have, just unique stories from every type of profession, and hopefully inspiration and learning opportunity for all of you that are listening or watching. But what's special about this one is today, the official start of season 10 is episode number 1000. Now, full disclosure, because I'm not here to fool anyone. When I started this podcast back in late 2017, I had advice from a good friend of mine, my good friend Jeff Landsman, who had been doing podcasts before me. And he said, just start in the hundreds and then next season 200s, 300s. I don't know that he was trying to fool anybody, but my point is that we don't do 100 episodes per season. So this is not the 1000th episode we've ever done, but it is the first time we've gone into 4 digits in terms of labeling an episode. And it's not like we've done 10 or 20. We've done 500, 600. I don't know. I haven't counted them up yet. So it's been a lot of guests, a lot of interesting people, a lot of content. And today, which sounds really cool to start season 10, is episode 1000. I thank all of you for listening, long-term, short-term, checking in, checking out. The beauty of the guests is we really run the gamut with every type of story, not trying to get just into one specific field. So today I'm joined by an entrepreneur, and it's usually entrepreneurs, not always, but I'm joined by an entrepreneur who saw potential and did the impossible. His name is Matt Rizzetta, founder and chairman of North 6 Group, a top entertainment investment group bridging the gap between American and European soccer, or football over there. Using a winning mix of business, enterprise, and passion for sport, he's a driving force behind clubs who rose from obscurity to Serie C, and by finally giving the underdogs a chance to shine, has tapped an entire market of new possibilities in the world of modern soccer. So we're combining here sports, one of the greatest global sports in the world, with business and entrepreneurship. And so I guess I would say you don't have to be a soccer fan. I'm a casual soccer fan, not a diehard. A lot of diehards in my family used to play the sport at a very mediocre level. But really, really fascinating stuff. So I'm excited right now to be joined by Matt Rizzetta from New York. Matt, how are you?
Hey, Joel. Thanks for having me on the program. Appreciate it. And I feel a lot of pressure today being the guest number 1000.
No pressure, just a number. But one that I wanted to be able to celebrate. And I'm really excited about this because I think there's a lot to learn in terms of innovation, in terms of vision, and certainly in terms of the most visible global sport. And as you and I talked beforehand, I'm coming to you from a place in Kansas City where soccer is a huge, massive thing. And I think that, I say this about a lot of the guests I have, but whether you're interested in this topic or not, I think that there's a lot to learn here. So let's begin with this, and then we'll dig into kind of European soccer, American soccer, and everything that you're doing. But tell me a little bit about North 6 Group and what that is.
Yeah, and again, Joel, thanks for having me on the program. I do feel like I do feel like I'm in the I have the ball on my foot on the 18-yard box here, on the 18 on the spot.
Fire away.
But so my name is Matt Rizzetta. I'm the founder and chairman of North 6 Group. Just real quick on my background, I started marketing services business called North 6 Agency. That's my primary background, and that's where I got my start in business. I was a 26-year-old first-time entrepreneur, had a wife at home, 8 months pregnant, just quit her job, that classic kind of entrepreneurial story. And we started the agency out of my basement. And then over the span of about 10 or 12 years, we scaled it into great business, became one of the fastest growing firms in our sector. And then I got out of bed one day. It was right before COVID. And I just was ready for a change. I was ready for a new challenge. I was ready to learn about new types of businesses. And I was always very passionate about sports, about soccer in particular. I grew up the grandchild of Italian immigrants. So Italian football in particular was always very near and dear to my heart. And I wound up taking a minority stake out in this club called Campobasso, kind of a classic Cinderella, underdog type story. This club that lived in the sort of shadows of Italian football between Rome and Naples and never really got the credit it deserved. It had just been relegated down to the 5th tier, which essentially is an amateur tier in football. And fell in love with the project, turned a minority stake into a control stake, and got the club promoted twice. And now here we are, 4 or 5 years into this kind of new chapter in my career, and we have 5 assets in our sports ownership portfolio. And I never thought it would become what it has become, but that it really just started. It was born from passion and from a connection I had to my grandparents and to my love of Italy and soccer and all the things that kind of conjured up great memories from my childhood.
What a cool, I'll call it a passion project. Maybe it was that at the start. I don't know. You could correct me if I'm wrong, but I love to talk to people about their journeys because, sometimes it's, hey, this is what I set out to do. But more times than not, it's, I wanted to dip my feet in, or I wanted to do this, and it turned into something else or something so much more. And I'm guessing that when you started this, you weren't saying, okay, we're going to have this portfolio of 5. But it seems to me as though, as you just talked about, your connection to your grandparents, your connection to Italy, your perhaps your love of soccer, and then that Cinderella story, right? I mean, these are the things that we see on our streaming services. These are the stories of the Wrexhams of the world, whatever it is, right? That suddenly it's, hey, I want to try this, or I want to do this, and you turn it around. And what was the sort of the storyline, the arc for you? What were you going in intending to do as you jumped in with that first team?
Well, I really originally when I invested, it was mainly to fulfill a lifelong dream of mine, which was to become an owner in an Italian football club. I really felt like it was kind of a sign also to my grandparents, my grandfather in particular, who really could have never even dreamed beyond his wildest imagination that, he would be 1 or 2 generations removed from somebody in their family owning a professional football club. So it was really passion. It was really driven by, values of, family and culture and opportunity. In this particular case with Campobasso, it's very similar. You mentioned Wrexham. There's a lot of similarities between those 2 projects. So it was also an opportunity, I think, for me and my group to give an identity to a region of Italy that had long been forgotten. They literally call it the place that doesn't exist in Italy because it gets sort of overlooked by the, Rome and the Amalfi Coast, and the larger, more touristy, well-known touristy destinations to the north and south. So that's really what brought me there. But then once we got there, it's just been a series of, just like anything in life and your career, it's been a series of kind of circumstances and, figuring it out as you go along and rolling with the punches. And, it's never a straight line. It's always a really, curvy line. And you just need to understand kind of when you have to take advantage of opportunities, when you have to cut your losses. And I never got into this thinking we would build an MCO, multi-club ownership group, but it just kind of happened that way. And we're still very much figuring it out. 4 years later, it still is very much a work in progress, and it's a book that continues to be written as we're going along. So
when you were a little bit younger and you're getting into the work world, what were the goals? The dream, I guess, was to do what you're doing now, but what was the goal? Just to start an agency? Was the goal, hey, I'm gonna own a team one day, or did that sort of develop it a little? I mean, obviously you're not at 22, 25 years old saying, I'm going to go own a soccer team, but what were you hoping to do?
Well, I think my ambitions have sort of evolved, Joel, over the years. When I first got started, originally it was really just to be able to start a business that I could call my own and provide for my family, and to me, that was my dream and my ambition at the time. Was, I remember telling my parents at one point, hey, if I could just own a business and not have a boss for the rest of my life, I would be happy. And obviously that sort of, changed and evolved. And I realized that the more ownership you have, the more and more bosses you have, because my concept and my idea of what is a boss, or what a boss is a lot different today than it was. Now I have more bosses than I've ever had in my life, but I own more businesses than I ever did before. So it's kind of interesting how that all worked out. But that was my original ambition, was just to be able to support myself with my own business and be able to provide for my family. And then as we scaled, you started to realize that it feels so much better to win with other people around you. You want to bring people with you. I think relationships are probably the most valuable currency you could have in your career. So it became almost like a drug. It became an addiction, just to surround yourself with great people. Your success is their success. Their success is your success. I became very quickly enamored with the idea of building teams and building cultures and building families. And that's really what motivated me. And then ultimately, when we wound up taking over our sports interests in the soccer team, this is sort of the ultimate team, and it's the ultimate family, and it's the ultimate asset that galvanizes people. So for me, I'm really, I'm blessed today. At 42 years old, I'm living my dream. I get to wake up every morning and genuinely love what I'm doing. And I count myself very, very lucky. I'm 1 or 2 generations removed from my grandfather being in the garment district and the sweatshops, making crazy sacrifices to, put his grandson in a position where he could live out his dream. So I'm also very, fortunate to be able to do that. And it's also a very humbling thing, without their sacrifices, I would never have been able to, do the things that I'm fortunate enough to be doing today.
It's a beautiful story, and to be knee deep in the middle of all of this. And I don't, I know the best of entrepreneurs, they never stop. You're constantly evolving. You're constantly moving on to the next thing. You just, no one ever says, all right, I'm good, I'm done. That's just not the way entrepreneurs are wired. And so you go from 1 to 2 to 3 to 4 to 5. And I know that there's there is a minority stake in New York as well. So I mean, we're talking about European and American soccer here. And I'm curious, I think that anyone that is listening to this podcast that is a soccer fan, they know the differences, but those that don't, we're talking about different worlds here, right? And so I mentioned in the intro, bridging the gap. Tell me more about that. How big of a gap is it? I don't know what that gap, I know it, I understand it, but I'm not sure exactly what it means or where you're trying to go. So what are the differences, and how are those gaps being bridged?
No, it's a great question, Joel. I can tell you in our experience, with our European clubs, soccer is, football is religion. It's 7 days a week. It's 24 hours a day. It's 365 days a year, nonstop talking, about soccer, breaking down the games that are about to be played, reviewing the games that were just played, criticizing owners for not spending enough money, criticizing, coaches for not coaching games. Probably that's literally all they do, particularly, with the 2 clubs we own in Europe, Campobasso in Italy and Dagenham and Redbridge Daggers in East London in England. That's the experience. Now, the big difference that, at least in our experience, has been in Europe, the product is everything, the product being the sport, the game, right? And that's all they care about. Everything kind of revolves around that. So you talk about the game day experience, the marketing, the entertainment, that's kind of an afterthought. The product, the sport is religion. That's really, it's sacred. In the U.S., in our experience with Brooklyn Football Club, we own 2 professional clubs here in the U.S., Brooklyn Football Club men's franchise and the Brooklyn Football Club women's franchise. There's more of an emphasis on, the entertainment, the fan experience, the content, everything that sort of revolves around it. So we've tried to do our best to kind of take a page from the American playbook and adopt it with our European clubs and vice versa. So when we think about operating our European clubs, we're trying to add a little bit more flair, a little bit more fan engagement, a little bit more, Americanization, if you will, for lack of a better word, to how we operate those clubs. And then in the U.S., we're doing a little bit more European style, where it's like it's a laser focus on the product. Ultimately, we feel like if we don't nail the product, we could have the best marketing, we could have the best entertainment, and it's just the project is never going to work, particularly in a market as competitive as New York and Brooklyn. If we don't deliver a world-class product, we know that the rest of the project's going to fail. So I think those are things that we've learned from our experience and been able to take a page book from, a playbook from each of the pages of the clubs overseas and domestically.
Really interesting that you're able to steal one sort of concept from the other, and use both of those to maybe bridge the gaps or fill in the blanks, right? So if football is religion over there, you typically don't need as much of the entertainment, marketing, fan experience because they're going to come no matter what, but yet you can fine tune that, right? You can adding a little bit of that, maybe it's a competitive advantage. And the flip side over here, honing in on that religion while already getting the other stuff. It reminds me a little bit, and I'm always a little hesitant to do this because not everything that I compare to has to compare to baseball, but it is my life. And when I look at just in the US here, you don't have to have as much of the entertainment. I'll use, I think, your team, the Yankees. You don't have to have as much entertainment at Yankee Stadium or Fenway Park because it is a religion. Especially, if you go to, I'll use Fenway Park or Wrigley Field for the Cubs. Two stadiums that are over 100 years old. Iconic for any sports venue in the world, whether people know baseball or not. The experience when I walk into Fenway Park is totally different than the experience of walking in to most other stadiums. They don't have to do as much of the entertainment. They don't have to do as much of, I guess, what I would call the gimmicks. And I don't know that that's the right word because a good gimmick is not a gimmick. I don't think it's entertainment. It interests the fans and helps them. But I'm wondering if that's a little bit of when you go to an NFL game at Lambeau Field, or if you go to a hockey game in Montreal, all places that I've worked, you don't need a whole lot of the bells and whistles. It's already built into the culture and has been forever. Is that a fair comparison of what you're trying to do in building that maybe religion here and then building maybe that marketing over there?
Absolutely, because to your point, Joel, you can't buy it. You can't buy the tradition and the history. I mean, you talk about Lambeau Field, you talked about Montreal with the Canadiens. I mean, those are traditions that are passed down generation to generation. And you walk into those places and it's, it is a borderline religious experience. They're cathedrals, right, for the sports. And it's been exactly like that, probably on steroids, actually, in Europe. When we go to visit our club in Campobasso in Italy, I mean, all week long, all they do is talk about the game on Sunday. And, you go to a restaurant and fans are coming up to you and greeting you and talking about how the club's performing on the pitch. And, Prez, why didn't you play this player? And why are you playing this? And it's, it really is an incredible, it's a borderline religious experience. It also motivates you. It motivates you as an owner because you realize the connection between the community and the club, right? And you want to perform for these people because you're changing in many cases, you're changing the trajectory of generations. Like in Campobasso, getting promoted to the next tier for them would be a life-changing experience. It would change their lives. It would give them stories to pass on from generation to generation. So how can you wake up and get out of bed every day and not be motivated by that? So, I agree with you. I think when you go to Fenway Park, I think when you go to Lambeau Field, I think it's a similar experience. The difference is that there's like zero, commercialization, at least, in our experience when we're going over to Italy. And then Daggers, same thing in East London. It's, these are clubs that have been around for a hell of a long time, and they're going to be around for a hell of a lot longer than you're going to be here for. So you have to, it's also very humbling. You realize that you're just a custodian, for this club and a guardian for this club that ultimately is going to be passed on to someone else. And really your role and responsibility is just to hand the club off in better shape than you inherited it. So,
I mean, it's so interesting just to live in both of those worlds. It has to be, right? I mean, because you can't do things the same way as you've established. I misspoke, I think, a little bit before, and I talked about minority ownership, and that's one of the, your teams overseas. But I'm curious, just with your group and what the process was like in creating something in Brooklyn, in essentially, correct me if I'm wrong, starting from scratch, right? I mean, you have an empty slate, and you have all this influence from domestically and internationally. You have a chance to create that. What was the mindset? What were the goals? That seems like such a daunting task, Matt. But it's like anything else, right? I mean, it's starting a new business. There are no guarantees, of course, with anything else. But I guess when you're over in Europe and you have these quote unquote religious institutions, you have these institutions that are generational. It's more about don't screw it up. You got a lot of people that are putting a lot of pressure on you. I've got to think that the pressure when you're starting something from scratch is more on your, it's coming from yourself. It's got to be coming internally because there's not that expectation. How is the difference? Well, what was it like to start that?
No, I agree with you. I think it's more mental, mental warfare in many cases, because Brooklyn in particular will probably go down, to this point in my career as the accomplishment that I'm most proud of, by far, that I'm proudest of. I think just getting to the starting line has been such a difficult and challenging journey, but you need the stick-to-itiveness, you need the perseverance, because you'll go crazy. Everyone says, I can't tell you how many people over the past 3 or 4 years told me, Matt, you're crazy if you think you can bring professional football to Brooklyn, and they'll list all of the reasons why it can't be done. And, as an entrepreneur, I think you have a vision, and you need to stick to that vision, and you need to be incredibly resilient. You need to know that there's going to be so many obstacles. I mean, dealing with the city of New York and Brooklyn in particular, it is not without its challenges. When you talk about facilities, you talk about infrastructure, you talk about the cost of doing business here, you talk about competition for the entertainment dollar, which is incredibly fierce in New York. But we had a vision. I had a vision, and I was determined to get it to the starting line. And now that we're at the starting line, this is probably, I believe, this was the hardest part, just to get it from vision to liftoff. Now, once it's liftoff, it's obviously a different set of challenges or whatnot, but the hardest part, in my opinion, is behind us. So I'm super proud of it. Obviously, it's a different experience, like you said, Joel. Starting something from scratch comes with incredible amounts of challenges, but also gives you incredible opportunities to innovate, to experiment. It's a blank slate, like you said, so you can sort of come up with your own rules, as opposed to the European clubs, which are either generations old, and they're very set in their ways in some cases, and they have their own set of customs and traditions that you need to be very mindful of. So I think that you try to lean into that when you're building something from scratch, and really embrace the opportunity to innovate and experiment and do things from scratch, because they haven't been done before and there are no rules.
Is the similarity, though, between, say, Campobasso and Brooklyn the underdog story, the Cinderella story? Because when you're starting something, you are the underdog. You don't have an expansion or start a franchise and go straight to the top. Almost never. And when you're rescuing a team that has a history that's over 100 years old, you've got to find a way to get back up there. Is there a common thread in the way you're wired that says, I like the Cinderella, I like the underdog? Absolutely.
In fact, the common thread in our ownership group, in our assets, is that they all have to be underdogs. So, that's it. Like if you go to KFC, they just do chicken. Like you come to North Six Group, we just do underdogs. Like that's our thing. We're underdog. We kind of always viewed ourselves as underdogs. We've kind of all started from nothing to, build maybe a little bit of something of consequence in our own ways. And we always carry a chip on our shoulder. And these are underdog stories. Campobasso is a place in Italy that was totally overlooked and told, they were never given any favors. These people out there, huge potential, but never had the resources or were given the opportunity or the chance to achieve something. So that's kind of a quintessential underdog story. Same thing with Daggers. It's in a part of London, the London metro area, East London, that often gets overlooked. One of the few areas of London yet to go through gentrification. Very much kind of a first generation immigrant, mentality and community. And, we were motivated by that. And of course, Brooklyn travels the world as an underdog. You can't think of a more quintessential underdog place than Brooklyn. And that's the common thread. So we'll always look at that when we evaluate any of our deals. We'll look at thousands of deals per year. And if the first question we ask us is this a underdog story? Is this something that can be told in a way and really built in a way that can represent that underdog journey that we all can rally behind? And if the answer is no, we don't look at it.
It's such a. Here's the thing I love about it. I mean, among many things, is that everyone likes the underdog story. It's just in us as people, as in humanity, right? Now, that doesn't excuse you from liking the Yankees, by the way.
Yeah,
But you know, if you grow up with that, you grow up with that. I obnoxiously like to tell any of my Yankees friends, and I have plenty of them. And by the way, here in Kansas City, they come out of the woodworks when the Yankees are in town with stories like, well, my grandfather loved Mickey Mantle, so that's why I'm a Yankees fan. And, you know, all this stuff. It's like, I always make the joke. We have Manhattan, Kansas, 2 hours from Kansas City, where Kansas State is. And I always make the joke that it's great to have everyone in at the stadium from Manhattan, Kansas, because I don't think they came all the way from New York. But the Yankees are a brand, right? The Yankees are Manchester United or whatever it is, AC Milan. The Yankees are that worldwide brand. And so that's the generational part that I think in some ways that you're talking about. But for the most part, we all like the underdog. The reason why everybody rooted for the Kansas City Royals in 2015 was because they were the small market underdog and they won it. The reason why a lot of people were rooting for the Royals this year against the Yankees, even though the Yankees won, is that they were the underdog. They were the chip on the shoulder. But I like to give my Yankees fans crap when I say that, in the last 15 years, the Royals and the Yankees combined have won world championship, and that came from Kansas City. It's a very obnoxious thing to do to a fan base that has experienced, or their families have experienced 27, I think it is, world championships over the years. The Yankees are the gold standard. My question, before we get to my baseball theme questions, is how do you get your Cinderellas, your underdogs, to that? And I'm not suggesting that you're ever going to get to, or anyone is. There are only so many Yankees and Canadians and Red Sox and Packers and and Man U's in the world. They're global institutions forever. But the goal, I would imagine, is to be on the same level with them competitively. The goal is to get to whatever that highest level is eventually and win, right? That's the chip on the shoulder and the ultimate goal. We all want to win. So what are the goals and how do you get there?
Well, Joel, so that's a great question. In fact, I think that that's one of the big reasons why we really like to bet on the underdog over here, because in soccer, this is the beauty of soccer, football, particularly in Europe, where they have the promotion and relegation system. I feel like entrepreneurs are always motivated by goals. And then once they achieve the goal, like you said earlier, they're sort of ready on to the next goal, right? And that's the beauty of a lot of these projects, where there's always another goal, right? So in our case, like we took over Campobasso, they were in the 5th tier, which is essentially an amateur tier in Italy. And what did we do? We set a goal. Let's get to the 4th tier. And we put the team together, by the way, 10 days notice. When we bought the club, we had 10 days to put together a team. We had no players, no coach, no medical staff. We had a stadium that was left abandoned, and we actually got promoted that year. So we checked that box. And then what happened? We said, what's the next goal? Well, let's get promoted to the 3rd tier. Right? And so I think that is one of the things that really motivates us in Club Underdog, which is our holding company, our portfolio. There's always something else to achieve, right? And we're going to be, and I think that that's a class that's very motivating also to entrepreneurs, because no matter how much work you put in, no matter what you accomplish, there's always something else to achieve. I mean, in Campobasso, obviously someday we hope to be competing at the highest levels of the European football pyramid. But you know what? It's going to take a hell of a long time to get there. And there's a lot of steps ahead of us. So as an entrepreneur, that motivates me. And that, I think that motivates all of us, because you wake up every day, you get out of bed and you say, there's a goal ahead of me. I'm going to hit that goal. And then there's going to be another one. And I think that's the cool part. I do hope, I think the pro-rel system is one of the most endearing and interesting sporting systems in the world. So I do hope eventually that the U.S. soccer system adopts it. Obviously we'll see where that goes, but just from our experience in Europe, it's been an amazing experience. And I think it's created incredible memories for all of us. And it's given us a sense of hope, a sense of pride, and something to continue to aspire toward and to achieve, which I think is really the purpose that sports plays in society.
Could you imagine if we had relegation in, say, baseball and American football, and it's just not set up for that, because the teams that would then jump over them and when they're relegated are essentially minor league affiliates, right? I mean, they used to joke back in the, I don't know, 60s, 70s that the Royals were like a training ground for, well, they even still joked later, training ground for the Yankees, or that the Yankees minor leaguers were like, It would be amazing to see a AAA team come to the big leagues. It'd be amazing to say, you know what? The Cleveland Browns were terrible again. They're going back to we don't have that second tier per se. To me, it's more, at least from football and baseball, maybe there's some entertainment type of stuff. But I just think it's so fascinating the way that works and the motivation that must be involved for everyone involved, say in a European soccer club that understands that their performance on and off the pitch potentially is the difference between being at this level or down at this level next year. And when you're down at this level, all you want to do is get back. I've got to think that is just daily motivation, extra motivation.
Oh, for sure. It keeps you on your toes. There's something constantly to aspire toward. And then also there's the other end, which is there's constant fear. There's fear of relegation. There's fear of, oh my God, I don't want to go down. And as an entrepreneur, I think it's really representative of the entrepreneurial journey. It's sort of a microcosm of what the entrepreneurial journey is all about, because every day is a fight for survival. You're fighting to achieve you're living to try to fight for the next day, right? And you're also fighting to avoid going out of business in some cases, or losing an employee or losing a client. So I think it's kind of constantly provided us with this daily motivation that you need to be successful. And by the way, you're speaking to a New York Jets fan. So if the pro rel system happened in U.S. soccer, we'd probably be competing against high school teams at this point, but so I'm kind of fortunate that we haven't done it in U.S. American football, at least.
It'd be really weird to have an NFL based on the way things are going right now with no New York teams.
Yeah, but that would be the case.
Which is, by the way, I'm all for the small market, but really weird to have two traditional historic institutions like the Giants and Jets both not be very good. Anyway, that's a different story for another day and another sport. Let's get to the baseball themed questions. You've got a nice career going, and I know so much ahead of you. What's the biggest home run that you've hit professionally?
I think if I had to say one thing that I'm most proud of, it would be the fact that we brought professional football to Brooklyn. Just getting it to the starting line, I think, was probably the most challenging thing that I was faced with in my whole career. And it was just a constant It was just a constant series of challenges. Where are you going to play? What league are you going to play in? How are you going to negotiate territory rights and franchise fees and all of that stuff? There had been people that tried to do it before and failed. So I never thought I would find myself saying this, because just getting to the starting line to me is not necessarily an accomplishment, but just the fact that we've gotten Brooklyn to the point where we're ready for liftoff. The girls are playing. They're in first place. Men's team's about to play soon in the USL Championship. I think I would say that's probably the thing that I am proudest of.
That's great stuff. How about a swing and a miss along the way, and what did you learn from it?
I don't know, Joel. I mean, look, as an entrepreneur, you're constantly making mistakes and learning and experimenting and trying to figure out what worked and what didn't work. So I don't know if I can point to necessarily one specific incident, because there's been so many, but I can just say in general, my biggest swings and misses usually revolve around people, poor people management decisions that I made to hire someone that I shouldn't have hired, or maybe let go of someone and I should have never let go of them. And I think the important thing is just to learn. I remember I got to a point in my career where I became very data oriented, and I would actually track commonalities and I would track trends. So, when I would make a people decision that went wrong, I would sort of retrace my steps to what led me to make that decision. And I would find patterns. These are the fact patterns. These are the behaviors that I had that led me to these people decisions that ultimately failed. And then, you just try to get one decision better, each time. I tell young entrepreneurs all the time, you're not going to go from, 0 to 100 overnight. You're going to do it incrementally. So the best way to get there is just to focus on how can you get one decision better each time. And that's been my learning lesson. When we do deals now, what's one thing I did wrong in this deal? And that's one thing that I'm going to not do wrong the next deal. And, those are things that I think incrementalism is probably something that often gets overlooked, but this is a marathon. It's not a sprint. So over the course of the long run, usually that's what leads to success.
That's great advice. And every now and then there might be that outlier, right? Or that unicorn that somehow goes from 1 to 100. But I mean, if you're banking on that, you're never going you're never going to. That's winning the lottery is what that is, and it just doesn't happen. Final question for baseball themed small ball: what are the little things that add up to big results in your business or on the pitch or wherever it might be?
Look, I think the details count. And it's funny, now that we're in the sports business, Joel, for 4 or 5 years, I have a fresh perspective and a completely new perspective and appreciation for how sports organizations are run. I was a fan for 37 years of my life, right? So I would always you take things for granted as a fan. You show up to the stadium and the lights are on and the team's playing and the coaches are coaching, and you just sort of take it for granted that things just happen magically, but they don't happen magically. In order to get to that point, there's such a level of rigor and discipline and detail behind the scenes that gets there. So that's the thing I think I'm most appreciative of. It's the little things, it's the little details. It's the administrator behind the scenes who's filing paperwork with the league. It's the ticket taker, who's showing up to work, 2 hours before the game to get the turnstiles ready. Mm-hmm. It's the assistant coach, it's the goalkeeper's coach, it's the medical staff who's getting the players in condition to take the pitch. Those are things that I really took for granted for so long. And now I realize without them, we would have nothing. I think those are the things that I would encourage any prospective sports investor and owner to really focus on, because it's easy to take these things for granted when you're not operating them. When you're operating them, you realize the importance of all the little things that go into making these clubs tick.
I think that's so important, and it's not just a sports thing, right? It's any organization. We always hear top to bottom, from the CEO, from the boardroom to the janitor, or whatever it is, everybody in between. I could use just sports as an example from a standpoint of when a team wins a championship, and I was lucky enough to be a part of one in 15. Didn't, by the way, have to be included in them giving me a ring. It's the most beautiful gift I've ever received, and I wear it. Used to wear it on the air for a couple of years. I wear it to all my speaking engagements. I use it as a teaching tool. But part of that teaching tool is that it takes everyone. And what is my role in the team winning a championship? Hopefully I'm a liaison to the fans and able to bring everybody closer to each other. I understand that role, but there's a reason why the massage therapist gets a ring. There's a reason why the accounting department gets rings. There's a reason why the head security guard gets a ring, right? I mean, they are there for a reason. I hate when you ask someone, hey, what's your job? Oh, wow, you work for some big company or some sports team. Well, what do you do? Well, I'm just the accountant. No, you're not just the accountant. You just happen to be the person that isn't seen the way the superstar is seen, right? I mean, no, we're not all going to be Aaron Judge. No, we're not going to all be Lionel Messi or whoever it is, right? There's something really sweet in terms of small ball about it involving everyone.
I completely agree. It's the ultimate team sport. And you're right that I think back to when we were building our other businesses, our marketing business, and it's always a team effort. It takes a village, right? And it's really the truth. In fact, I remember, just as a quick story, when we took over Campobasso, I originally invested as a minority investor, and then we ultimately took a control stake. When I went over to my first trip in Italy to Campobasso as a minority investor in 2020, there was a guy named Mario Colalillo, okay? And he was the first guy in the office, I noticed, and the last guy to leave every day and every night. And he was just there on his computer typing away. And I asked around and I said, who is this guy? He's working his butt off. And the old owner told me, oh, he's just our administrative secretary. He's just our secretary. That's what he told me. And Mario had an accident when he was growing up. So he's basically blind in one eye, and it's very visible. His handicap is very visible when you see him. And he was sort of overlooked in many ways, and I think disrespected by the old ownership group. But he was the hardest worker by far in the organization. And then when we wound up taking a control stake the following year, I needed to then build my leadership team. And the very first decision I made was I needed a CEO. And I hired Mario Colalillo as my CEO. And he said to me, you're making me the CEO. He said, I've never been a CEO before. I've only been a secretary. Secretary, by the way, in Italian football, it's an important position. It's an administrative position. They deal with the league and federation and, payments and stuff like that. And I said, Mario, I'm going to give you a chance. Step up. I want you to be a leader. And he has been the best administrator and the best leader out of any football organization in Italy over the past 3 years. And for me, that sort of underscores exactly what you're saying. It's a team effort. You want to give people chances. You want to make bets on people. Ultimately, I say careers are just bets you're making on people. Some bets pay off, some bets don't pay off. And, if you make the right bet at the right time on the right people, it's a guaranteed formula for success. So I've just been really blessed to have, I think, bet on a bunch of people who have really kind of helped lift me up. And maybe in some small way, I've kind of helped lift them up. And that's been the beauty. It's been a reciprocal, total team effort and relationship.
Mario is the quintessential underdog story that so represents everything that you believe in. That's what I'm hearing there. That is just an absolutely inspiring. That's like a made-for-TV movie type of story. I mean, it's just absolutely spectacular. Okay, 4 final questions as we round the bases. The first, I mean, you're involved in winning so many awards over the years with your, I guess, kind of previous life, right? Go back 2014, top 20 fastest growing agencies in the US, and the list goes on and on. Fastest growing this, and Power 50 list, and Media Innovation of the Year. Little did you know back 10 years ago that you would be doing this right now. What did that life and that world, how did that shape you or influence you to get to this point?
Well, I think it encouraged me to take risks. I was, when I first started our business, I had no money. I had no connections. I never had to run a business before. I had no idea what it was like to run a business, frankly. And I took a risk, and fortunately, it paid off. And I got to a point in my career where I was ready to take another risk. And that other risk was I didn't want to be typecast as a marketing executive or as a, small business entrepreneur. I wanted to kind of be known and seen as something else. And it was a sports owner and a sports operator. And when I made that decision, I thought back to the early days, the first phase of my career. And I said, look, if I was courageous enough to take this first risk in my career, why not be courageous enough to take the second risk? And I'm really proud of that. Looking back on it 5 or 6 years later, I'm probably, more well known in my network today as a sports owner and operator than I am as a marketer. And for me, that's a good thing. I think careers should always be a constant evolution, and, you should have a hunger and a thirst to innovate and to change and to evolve and to adapt into new environments. And I think that is, to me, one of the things that I am most proud of over the years.
Second question, as we round the bases, let's go back to that Italian heritage and your grandfather. And I mean, you spoke so beautifully about him and the influence and what you're able to do now. Take me back to a time of learning soccer, Italian soccer, from your grandfather. What was that like as a child?
Well, there's few things, Joel, I feel like that can literally bring you back to your childhood. I'm sure when you think about your childhood, I'm sure there's 2 or 3 things you can think of, and you can literally put yourself, in a very specific moment in time when you're 8, 9, 10 years old. For me, that moment in time was Sundays, sitting on my grandfather's lap, espresso, the smell of espresso coming from my grandmother's kitchen, and Italian football on TV back then. This was, the early 90s, late 80s. This was Italian soccer was, in its prime. It was the best league in the world with Maradona and, the Juventus teams and the AC Milan teams with Van Basten and whatnot. I mean, Serie A in Italy was where soccer was at. I mean, it was the mecca of soccer in the early 90s. And then fast forward to when, 30 years or so later, when I decided to invest in Italian football, I felt like it was one of the only things I could invest in that literally brought me back to my childhood. And that in itself was worth the price of admission. I tell people all the time, I feel very selfish. I feel it's to me, it's selfish because the satisfaction and the gratification that I am getting from, this latest chapter in my life, you can't put a price on it. It feels like I should be paying, people to be living, the experience that I'm living, not the other way around.
All right. 2 more. I was just curious. There's so many things I could ask you about. I mean, you're a former competitive boxer competing in Golden Gloves, but I want to ask about the two books, The Death of Irrelevant PR and Embrace the Pace, the 100 Most Exhilarating Lessons Learned in a Decade of Leadership. Let's hone in on that one. We've talked a lot about lessons, so there are 100 of them. Give me one or two that rise to the top of your list.
Well, ultimately, I think your career is a series of bets, you're making on people. I remember one thing I did early in my career when I started our business was I saved every note that anybody ever wrote me, right? Former employee, client, friend, mentor, peer. And I started this wall in my office, and it was called the Bet On Wall, right? And I put anybody who sent me a positive note on that wall. And those were essentially people who I felt made a bet on me. And I always felt like my career was a journey to pay them back for making the bet they made on me. And then I started another wall behind that wall, which was the bet against wall. And anybody who sent me a note saying they don't think I can do something, they got put on the bet against wall, right? And that's how I treated my career. Was every day I looked straight ahead, and there was a wall that reminded me of all the people who bet on me. And it was sort of my responsibility to pay them back for making the bet. And then I looked the other way, and there was a wall, the bet against wall, the people who said I couldn't do something. And my job was to prove them wrong. And that was always very motivating to me, to have one person that I always feel like your career should be a daily journey to say thanks to the people who bet on you, and also sort of a daily, motivation or, polite middle finger to the people who said you can't do something. And that's always how I treated my career. Yeah, and that's in the book, obviously.
Yeah, and that's that chip on the shoulder as well. Okay, the last question, the walk-off, and I think one of the fun things, and I know people are people. You do good things, and you put good into the world. You end up connecting with some of the most unique people that ultimately say, wait, they're just normal people. I think about, I was telling you, here in Kansas City, the creation of an NWSL soccer team and the first ever women's stadium in the world, not just for soccer, specifically for the women. So the owners of that team have done an incredible job, Chris and Angie Long, but their ownership group also includes a fairly famous couple here in Kansas City, Patrick and Brittany Mahomes, who go to the game. She goes to all of them, and he goes whenever he's not out there, beating the Giants or the Jets or whatever team that he is beating. But you've had that opportunity as well. That was a cheap shot. Sorry about that. But it's fair. They've built something really special here. You have had the chance to do that with a very famous couple as well that has invested in your team over in Italy. Tell me about that relationship, how it happened, and what that's been like.
Yeah, well, Kelly Ripa and Mark Consuelos have been incredible partners and supporters of our Italian project in Campobasso from day one. I met Mark through mutual friends in our network. Mark was born in Spain, but grew up in Italy. Italian football has always been near and dear to his heart. He played football, soccer collegiately, and he just became a great friend of mine. And we had this opportunity to buy Campobasso, which at the time I mentioned by sort of circumstance or happenstance was relegated to the 5th tier, but it was a great opportunity. It could have been, it was all hours. I went to him and I said, hey, Mark, there's this club called Campobasso. They're in the 5th tier, amateur tier, highest amateur tier. It's in a part of Italy that is a real underdog sort of place. It's, about an hour, 2 hours south of Rome, 2 hours north of Naples. It doesn't kind of get the credit it deserves, but there's a massive fan base there, massive fan base here in the United States. We have an opportunity to really build something special from the ground up and change, I think, the trajectory and the destiny of this fan base and of this region. And he said to me, Matt, he's like, what do we have to do? I said, well, we got to put a team together. He's like, well, how much time do we have? So I said, we have a little over a week because it was September 2nd or something. The first game was September 10th. And he goes, okay, do we have any players on the roster? And I said, no. And he said, well, we got a coach, right? What's his name? I said, no, we don't have a coach. He said, okay, well, do we have a sporting director that's going to hire a coach? And I said, nope, got to hire that guy too. And then he said, well, where are we playing? I said, I don't know that answer either, because we got a 25,000 seat stadium, but it was left abandoned by the old ownership group. So there's mushrooms growing on the pitch, and we're gonna have to find another stadium to play. And he like literally took a deep breath. He looked at me like I'm crazy, you know, which I am, and he still looks at me the same way today. And he said, "All right, where do I sign? I'm in." And from that point forward, you know, we've been joined at the hip, and you know, been arm in arm, hand in hand, building this thing. We've won 2 championships together, and we have an amazing ownership group behind us, you know, all over the world, in Montreal, Toronto, California, Pittsburgh, and right here in New York. And it's been a great team project. We built really a family within a family that's kind of grown the club. And you know, we wouldn't have achieved the success we've achieved without the support of everyone in that group. And Mark and Kelly obviously have brought incredible levels of visibility and notoriety to the club that we would never have dreamed of achieving without them. So I just feel blessed. You know, I tell everyone all the time, Joel, this is a privilege, you know, to be able to work in your passion, particularly in sports. I mean, this is not a job. It's really an honor. It's a privilege, and it keeps you very grounded. You have to realize that every day, if you don't, you know, take this for granted, there's 100,000 people behind you who want your job, who would kill for this. So, you know, you owe it to the communities you represent, the teams you own, the people, you know, that you represent, to give it 110%. This is 25 hours a day, 8 days a week, 366 days a year. I mean, that's literally what it is. It's more than you ever thought you can give to something, is what it takes to be successful in this game. But it's a privilege, and you have to constantly remind yourself of that. You know, I told you earlier, you know, not so far removed from my grandfather working in sweatshops in the garment district. You know, my mother worked in public school district in Mount Vernon, New York for 40 years without air conditioning. And, you know, to put me in the position that I'm in, and I feel really blessed and fortunate, and I feel an incredible weight on my shoulders to, you know, to be successful with this, because it's incredible to be even to have the opportunity to do things that they never in their wildest dreams could have, you know, had an opportunity to achieve.
Truly inspirational, epitomizing club underdog in every single way. I think I have some new soccer clubs, football clubs that I've got to pay attention to and root for, because I too love the underdog. Matt, congratulations on all of the success. And I say that understanding that it's still very early and there's a long, long ways to go. I know you're nowhere near the finish line. I don't know if you ever will be, by the way, because it never stops, as I said before, but so inspirational, so cool. I love the story. It's an amazing tribute to your grandfather, to your family, and I think the path they paved for you, which you're now doing for your family and for so many others, those communities. So I really appreciate you spending time on Rounding the Bases, and really fun to learn about this whole journey.
Thanks, Joel. Maybe we could get some advice too from the Kansas City ownership groups, because it seems like Kansas City's beaten New York at every sport imaginable lately. So we need some of that Kansas City touch.
Well, we need to give you some barbecue first and foremost. It all starts with that. That's where the conversation starts. Matt, thanks again so much.
You too, Joel. Thanks for the time. Appreciate it.
It's around the bases. Everybody knows Joe Goldberg.